On today's Edge of Wonder, we've invited a very special guest for an exclusive interview. You might have seen her work talking about China and exposing the Chinese Communist Party. She's been arrested and sent to labor camps multiple times, but she still fights for what she believes in. And now she's a human rights activist, speaking for truth and freedom.
Hey everyone, welcome to a very special episode of Edge of Wonder, where we are graced by the presence of Jennifer Zeng, who is a personality both on Twitter and on YouTube, where she does current affairs and politics. And she has an amazing Twitter account that Ben and I use all the time.
Especially during the CCP virus.
CCP virus.
You know, she was one of the main accounts that we were using.
And anything that has to do with what's really happening in China, in communist China, and specifically the harms that the CCP has been doing, not only to the people, but also to the people of the West. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So you actually have a book that came out, and it was inspired even from a movie. Your book is called Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom. And we thought it would just like really starting out, you kind of introducing yourself, who you are, and your story of how you got to be where you are is just incredible. And we really, Rob and I both really wanted to have our viewers really hear your story, because I'm sure there's so many people out there that are following you. You have 150,000 people following you on Twitter.
That's amazing.
But I don't know if everyone knows your story, so we really wanted a chance to bring you on to have you talk about it.
Yes, the book you just mentioned is my autobiography that I think the English version was published in 2005, the Chinese version 1 year earlier. It's about my experience of growing up in China during the Cultural Revolution, then going to the university, and then becoming a Chinese Communist Party member. And then I actually worked in the top, government policy consultant and research institute called the Development Research Center of the State Council. So I once wrote a speech for the premier then.
Right.
So, and then my health got totally ruined by the disease or by a medical accident I encountered when I gave birth to my daughter. And then I started practicing Falun Gong. And then 2 years later, we all know that in 1999, the crackdown on Falun Gong started. It's a so overwhelming crackdown. And then as a party member and someone who once worked for the government, I also ended up in prison. I was arrested 4 times and then ended up in the female labor camp in Beijing. On the first day when I was there, I just couldn't believe that this is still happening in the so-called New China and in the heart of China. The labor camp was only, I think, some 20 kilometers away from Tiananmen Square, from the heart of the so-called China. For one moment, I thought I was sent back by a time machine to the Nazi concentration camp during the Second World War, because I read it a lot in the history book, but I never ever imagined that would happen in the modern China. So that was just like suddenly you fell into a living hell on earth. And the experience was so overwhelming. So for the first 6 months, what I could only do is every day try to withstand all the torture, all the mental and physical pressure, and listening and hearing to all the torture around me, people screaming, sometimes people tortured into insanity and somebody tortured to death. Then after, witnessing all this happening around me, I suddenly developed a very strong desire to write a book to document all this, I think, inhumane and also the largest scale, the cruelest persecution on earth at that time. So I decided actually in the camp in October 2000, I need to escape and I need to write a book to expose them all. And then what happened is more, I think, for me personally, worse than all the physical torture I endured. In the next 6.5 months, after I determined to write a book, I was immediately faced with a dilemma, because it was the policy in the labor camp: if you don't give up your belief in Falun Gong, you will never be released. Even if you serve your sentence, they will just write up another one. If you want to be released, you have to denounce Falun Gong. And not only denounce Falun Gong, they later on set up a very high standard how to evaluate or assess whether you have been reformed or not. You need reformed or converted or give up. I don't know, that's the Chinese word is 转化. You need to be able to go public, to say out loud why you want to give up Falun Gong, and what the evil is, why Falun Gong is evil, why did you want to give up, and what did you plan to do after you gave up. And you need to help the police to reform others, because there are so many who haven't been reformed, to do evil for the police, to prove that you have been reformed. You know, with anyone who still have some conscience, who still have some, free will, how hard that was. So there were so many times I was on the very verge of total collapse, because I couldn't reconcile all these requirements and my own decision and my own desire and the struggle and the choices. What should I do? Which way should I choose? So that kind of struggle, and after I was, released, I prayed so many times. I hope never ever would one more human being be subjected to that kind of mental struggle. And the whole process of you experienced everything, I think it's way beyond all the wildest imagination of any normal human being, and only the evilest regime, the CCP, could do that to any normal human being. I witnessed so much. So I really hope any of your viewers could have a read of my book. Like my publisher said, your book was written with your life. It's not just an ordinary book, and it's, I think, impossible for me to talk about and go into all the details of how I get in and how I get out. So I think there are many, I think, journalists and writers also said this book should become a compulsory, a mandatory reading for our younger generations, or for journalists, or for politicians, because I think that was the first-hand account of the persecution of Falun Gong and published in English. I think that is the darkest history of China and of human modern history, and it's still in the dark. I think I sacrificed so much, and I hope people can have a read of that to learn a little bit of the darkness, because that darkness, if we don't expose it, it expands to other regions, and now it is affecting everyone in this world.
Wow, yeah. Already it's very emotional, your story. Would you be comfortable with kind of explaining some of the persecution that you went through?
Yes.
Because I'm kind of curious about, really...
And I think a lot of people don't understand how, it's one thing to say this is the worst persecution at that time in the world. It's another thing to hear about it. And what they were putting people through, because from what I understand is that the way that the CCP operates is that they actually took note of every torture method that had ever been used in history, and they were throwing everything. They were throwing the book at Falun Gong practitioners. And what was it like?
Yes, let me give you only a very little example. Because the police made it very clear, the only purpose for us to be sent there is to get us reformed.
Right.
So the first minute we were in the camp, the first sound we heard is the cracks of the electric batons. And then order squat. And before we could have time to look around to figure out our new environment, everyone was pushed to her feet and squat, and with our hands putting behind our heads, like looking at our feet, squat under the baking sun. For the first day, that was 15 hours. 15 hours. Yes, and squat and motionlessly. And there were many older ladies, elderly ladies. They couldn't endure that, and they fainted away. They lost their consciousness. And then immediately, an electric baton were applied on her to wake her up. And
these are elderly women.
Yes, they and elderly men also. I think the oldest I know was in the detention center, 83 years old man was in the detention center. And the youngest in the labor camp was a young girl, only 18 years old. She was tortured into insanity. So that was our first day. And from the second day on, because we were among the first group sent to that so-called dispatch center of Beijing labor camp personnel, because after the persecution, so many Falun Gong practitioners, before the persecution, there were, according to the official estimation, there were 70 to 100 million. So after the crackdown, so many people went to Beijing to appeal for Falun Gong. So all the detention centers and all the previous labor camps were filled up with Falun Gong, and they couldn't, cope with so many Falun Gong practitioners pouring into Beijing from all over the country. So the one we were sent to were actually newly built up after the crackdown of Falun Gong. So they didn't still have time to get work for us to do yet. So from the second day on, every day we have to stand motionlessly in the camp, like with our head put under before our belly and our head looking at our feet, and at the same time recite out loudly the regulations of the labor camp, non-stop, 16 hours per day. Shouting, reciting, and all the content of the labor camp regulation was very insulting, because you need to say, I promise I will not steal people's money. I promise, because that was given to the previous real criminals who were there because they were thieves, they were robbers, they were murderers, so and prostitutes. So I promise I won't do nasty gestures. We are decent, law-abiding citizens. We never thought of doing those kind of things. And now you have to recite out loudly, you promise you won't do those nasty things. So I feel like my mind was constantly raped by those ugly regulations. We had to recite out 16 hours per day. So on the second day, I almost went mad. So I asked the police, give me a piece of paper and a pen to write an appeal to my labor camp decision, because everyone should be able to appeal, but we were denied that kind of opportunity. So after they given us this so-called labor camp decision, it's not a sentence, because labor camp is not a legal system, so they call it a decision. We were not given any opportunity to appeal, so we're thrown right away in the labor camp. So as soon as the police officer heard I want this, two of them just dragged me from the cell and dragged me all the way to the courtyard, threw me on the ground and applied 2 electric batons on me until I lost consciousness. And that was only the second day. So every several other days, one group of new people were sent there, and whenever new people arriving, you could see they screaming under the electric baton. And they have a so-called reform ratio to achieve. So in the Beijing female labor camp, it's 95%, which means the police had to reform 95% of all the Falun Gong practitioners. And they were given the freedom to use whatever torture method they can just to achieve that quota. If they do a good job, they can be given extra bonus, and they encourage the real criminals to torture us so that they could be released ahead of time. So I think there were a very young lady, younger than me, and she also graduated from Beijing University or Peking University, that is the top university in China. So she was tied onto a chair and have 4 or 5 male guards shot her on her head, on her private part, until she lost bowel movement, and she couldn't walk for several months. And then, the criminals figure out another way. They push, 2 teeth brush together with the sharp end outside, and they push this thing, into the vagina of the female Falun Gong practitioners and twist until they saw blood came out. And sleep deprivation is also another very common use method to break our will down, because they don't bother if they torture you to death or they torture you to insanity. So at one stage, every night after we finished a whole night hard slave labor, all the non-Falun Gong practitioners were allowed to sleep. But for Falun Gong practitioners, they have to stand in the corridor in the building and with their face facing the wall, because everybody was so tired. So actually they fell asleep while they were standing. But whenever they fell asleep, their head knocked on against the wall and they were woke up. So for the whole night you can hear the dong 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 sound all the time. So the longest period I knew was kept by a lady. Her name is Zhang Yijie. She's actually in New York now. She was kept awake for 42 days, 42 nights. 42 days, 42 nights, and in the same labor camp as me. That's Beijing female.
How do you not die?
Yeah, so I think it's just a miracle. When I was in the camp, the longest, highest record is 15 days, 15 nights, no sleep.
You?
Not me.
Oh, but
the record, somebody in the labor camp. I was not allowed to sleep 3 days, 3 nights. So like the last night, I was, before my release, I was again, kept awake for the whole night. So that's why so many people were driven into insanity, because the sleep deprivation was just too cruel. I witnessed the moment of a young lady from Gansu province in her 20s. 1 minute ago, she was still herself. She was saying, I practice Falun Gong because I want to be a good person, and you want me to reform? No way. And they keep talking, keep torturing her, and then suddenly I saw a very stupid look, flash across her eyes, and then she suddenly began to laugh so loudly, so madly, and then she eagerly said, "Oh, give me pen, give me some piece of paper. I'll write everything, whatever you want me to write." And from that day on, she was no longer herself. And she was in a very special mental kind of state. If you talk about everyday life, she behaved absolutely normal, like a normal person. But whenever Falun Gong is mentioned, she was not herself. She would eagerly tell you why Falun Gong is evil, how Falun Gong is evil. You would wonder, she chose to practice Falun Gong, with her free will. Now she was totally against her own choice. And she eagerly talked about those nonsense because I think in her mind, she couldn't cope with all this torture. So that part of her mind just twisted itself into what the party wants her to think. And she, willingly, so those of things, when I watched that, the sadness in my heart was, I think it's better off you torture her to death. She still maintained her dignity, her, her spirit, her soul, but now you torture her into not a human being anymore because she couldn't, make her own judgment. And she's, sometimes I also feel myself is in the same kind of condition. You look like a human being, you have a human form, but all the essence inside this empty shell was taken away by the party. They grabbed it away. They didn't allow you to have your own soul, your own mind, your own free will. They want just keep an empty shell of you. That's good enough for them. So I think that's definitely anti-humanity crime. So the party should be held responsible for so many crimes it committed and so many victims. When I was sent in the camp, the first group, we were only some 20 of us, but in several months, there were 1,000 female Falun Gong practitioners in that one single camp.
Haiti, Planned Parenthood, Epstein Island. All roads seem to lead back to the same dark agendas, and we are bringing them all to the light. Don't miss this crucial conclusion to one of the most important Edge of Wonder series to date, Traffic, Part 3, The Fall of Babylon. Coming September 17th only on edgeofwonder.tv.
Can I ask you a question that probably people at home are wondering? So, we're talking about a labor camp, and we're talking about, you were reciting the labor camp rules, and it was all for criminals and stuff like that. You're being treated worse than criminals. You're being sleep deprived, probably worse than the criminals. They're sending the criminals after you to do things to torture you. Why do that to a meditation practice? Why do that to people who, on the surface, were just like, hey, I just want to be a good person? Why would they do something like that? What is it in the CCP that would allow them to do that?
I think the most obvious and surface reason is the Falun Gong's popularity. Like I mentioned earlier, Falun Gong was introduced to the public in 1992, and within 7 years, because it's very obvious health benefits, it developed very fast. So within 7 years, it had attracted more people than the party member. So at that stage, I think there were only maybe 60 million CCP members in China, but there were 70 to 100 Falun Gong practitioners. China is a one-party country. It never allowed any free thinking or independent some kind of group existed in the society. And I think that's the obvious reason. And I think more in-depth reason is the nature of the CCP. It's just the opposite of what Falun Gong practices. Falun Gong talks about truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. And the CCP is, conquering the world. They use the word conquering. They previous the China or conquering the enemy, and then they maintain their power through violence, through deceits, and so if these are so many people are practice truth, compassion, and tolerance, people will start to see the CCP members, their corruption and how they are always telling lies. Like fire and water can hardly, coexist, because the nature, I think, its evil nature is totally against with what Falun Gong promotes or Falun Gong practices. And by instinct, it will know if all people are practicing Falun Gong, there is no space for the CCP, because people's heart will want to go towards this. They want to improve themselves, to become good. And the CCP can no longer, convince people we are the best, we are the future of China. People will say, oh, you are always telling lies. These people never told lies. Even in the labor camp, on the one hand, the police torture us to death, but on the other hand, they know we could be trusted. Sometimes, two criminals fight, and you said you beat him, and he said he beat you, and the police don't know who to trust. But if there's a Falun Gong practitioner there, and he would ask that Falun Gong practitioner, who of these two guys are telling the truth? If Falun Gong practitioner say this guy, the police will trust this guy, because they know Falun Gong practitioners will never tell a single lie. If we promise just a false promise, we just say, like some other criminal said to us, if we can write just a guarantee to promise we will not commit any crime after we release, I would write 10,000 to them so that we could be released. But Falun Gong practitioners would not choose to make a false promise just to get released. They choose to not say any wrong word, and sometimes this choice has to be paid by their life, because if they were not released, they were not reformed, they could be tortured to death. So I think the nature of the party is evil, and the Falun Gong promotes higher moral standard. And evil people instinctively know if all people become good people, there is no space for their evilness in the world. So either you or me. So I have to eliminate you. I think that's their instinct choice.
Oh, thank you for explaining that.
So I think there's some people out there that are probably thinking too, why keep practicing? If this is happening, can you just stay inside and practice, or why keep going through all of this? And there's a lot of people in China that are going through what you're going through as well. And we haven't even talked about the forced labor camp yet either, but I wanted to give you a chance to kind of your answer of that, like what you think, like why keep going?
I think it's just like, the young people in Hong Kong now. They can choose to give up and just to follow the party's order. But because they have enjoyed freedom, they know the treasure or the beauty of freedom, so they choose to continue to go to the street to protest. Sometimes, they tear gas, some of them disappeared, some of them arrested. And also, I think in the early days of, Christian, they were also persecuted for 300 years, but they chose not to give up. I think for me, after I practiced Falun Gong for 2 years, I think the reason actually is very, very profound. Because I think as a human being, we are thinking all the time. Like me, I tried to figure out when I was in the university whether there is a ultimate truth in the universe. If there is, what that truth could be. I always believe there is truth, ultimate truth, otherwise, or some common kind of principles or law. Otherwise, the universe cannot maintain its stability and harmony. So I always want to try to find out that truth. So after I read the book of Falun Gong, I think it answered all my questions towards life, towards universe. And after I practiced it for 2 years, I believed more in what was said in those books. So when you have a very, I think, deep understanding of what you are practicing and why you should adhere to what you choose to adhere, I think that's human beings have the free will to choose for themselves, even if some people may choose otherwise. But I think the society, I think, especially for modern civilization, are based on the rule of law. If I don't break the law, I should have the right to think about anything. I don't harm anybody by just merely thinking about something. But in CCP's China, your thoughts could become a crime. That was what the police told me when I was in the detention center. I asked him why. He said to me, you would be arrested sooner or later. I asked him why. He said, because the highest level leaders in the Beijing city already took notice of you. I said, why? I'm just a common Falun Gong practitioner. Why should they take notice of me? And he thought really hard, and then he said very seriously, because of your thoughts. Because I think I wrote several articles to talk about why or what we should do in the new situation under the persecution, and that because in the articles there were my thoughts, and because of my thoughts, they think they should arrest me first.
Was it 1984 where they talk about thought crimes?
Yeah,
Thought crimes.
Thought police. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's much, much worse than 1949, because nowadays,
1984.
or 1984, yeah. Nowadays we have technology, much advanced in the book. So they have now, the CCP has, I think most of the technology was stolen or transferred or given by the Western big companies. So now everybody, they can monitor everybody's, virtually everything, every aspect of your life.
We refused to be terrified.
I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but there was a movie that you were featured in called Free China, The Courage to Believe.
So I am here today on behalf of more than 77 million Chinese people.
And your story is basically in this movie as well, and that's just a phenomenal movie, really well put together. And Charles Lee was the other person that there was you and Charles Lee. But did you do any kind of forced labor in the camps?
Yes, of course. I didn't have time to mention that yet. So when we were in that so-called dispatch center for 37 days, and every day we were given 2 minutes to use the toilet to wash our face, and only 2 minutes. 37 days we were never given any shower or washing of clothes or change of clothes, and in the hottest summer. And because every day we sweat, and then we just put it on and then dry again, sweat. And then there was so many salt in our pants after it was took off, it can stand alone by itself. That was the kind of situation we were in. And 37 days later, we were transferred to another camp. They actually used a previous male camp to hold female Falun Gong practitioners, like I said, because the scale kept expanding. And ever since we were transferred there, we were started to forced to do hard slave labor. So every day we were forced to get up at 5:30 and worked. We didn't have a watch in the camp, so we didn't know the time. But every day we had to work until midnight. And most of the job were hand knitted sweaters and like hands, scarves, cushions, anything you can imagine, we made it. And you know how heavy the quota was. Every day, everyone was given a quota. If you couldn't finish, you are not allowed to sleep. So because, you know, if you want to knit with your fastest speed, you must to have perfect dry hand. That's why after I used the toilet or the bathroom, I never dare to wash my hands, because no matter how you try to dry your hands, we don't have a dryer in the labor camp. You can only rub it on your clothing, that's the only way. But no matter how you rub it, it's still damp. And with a damp hand, you couldn't knit at your fastest speed. So I never wash my hand after I used the bathroom. And even on our way to the dining hall, we were still knitting while walking. Because every day we had so little sleep. Sometimes we had to work overnight so that our products could catch the plane, maybe to America, to Europe. And because the products we made in the camp were all exported to foreign countries, the police made it very clear to us. So it was very required, quality control. So sometimes we weren't given any sleep at all. So sometimes people ask me whether you miss your family a lot. I told no, definitely no, because every day there were only two thoughts in my mind. One is, how could I survive another day? Another one is, how can I have one more minute sleep tonight? So 1 more minute sleep is like better than gold. So because of we were sitting there knitting all the time, there were sores developed in our bottom. Everybody, it was painful just to sit down, because in the hottest weather we don't have air conditioner or fans, and so overcrowded. Everybody is, against everybody, and you have to knit all the time. Sometimes I really felt at the next second, because of the lack of sleep, there were so many times I felt I couldn't hold up my consciousness or my will together. And the next second, I felt sometimes the fear was so deep, because I felt my consciousness were dispersed into the air on the next minute. And I could imagine, even if I lost my consciousness, I became an idiot, I would still rush in. That would be the only thing I know. Maybe after I lost my consciousness, I would still be knitting my sweat all the time, even if I didn't know who I was and who my family. Maybe I wouldn't recognize my family anymore. So there were so many minutes I felt that would happen the next minute. I tried so hard to try to drag my consciousness back so that I wouldn't be turning into a sweater knitting idiot.
Zombie.
Yes, I felt that could happen at any minute. I think what helped me to survive and to get through all this is I paid a lot to be able to release, to write a book. But on the other hand, the determination to write a book, to document all the first-hand, torture or all the inhuman things, I think the determination kept me going on. And there were so many times I wanted to give up, but then I think I have to survive. I have to write this book. I need to tell the world what is happening to millions of Falun Gong practitioners. So it's really, and sometimes I think maybe someday we need really to make a proper movie. I write about the magnificent thing of everybody's knitting in a very small room with so many threads. We have to, undo them. When they came, they are in this length, and we have to do them in the balls, in the row, and then we need. So I think in the future, when this is over, the humankind really need to remember this piece of history so that this kind of tragedy will never happen again. Like we said several decades ago, never again, after the Second World or after the Holocaust against the Jews. But this is happening again, just, in such short period of time. So don't think this will not happen again. And yes, we are saying it's happening in Xinjiang, it's happening in Hong Kong, now recently it's happening in Mongolia. So if we don't stop it, we don't know who will become the next victim of the CCP.
I think probably a lot of people at home are like, why have you put this woman through this, like to retell this story? Like really, because I've actually at times during this interview, I could not hold back my tears and
still can't.
Just, listening to everything that you went through. But then I realized that exposing this is why you need to tell that story.
We have to stop it only by allowing people to know what's going on can things like this stop, because the more people that speak out about it, and that's partly why we created this channel with Edge of Wonder, was that we wanted people like you to come on to be able to tell their story, to alert the world of really what's going on.
So this is part one of a two-part interview with Jennifer Zeng, and we really appreciate you telling that story. And in the next episode, we're going to get a lot more into what you're doing now and what you're exposing right now in the mainstream.
And living under communist rule, and kind of how the CCP is infiltrating our elections now, So we'll get into all of that in the next episode.
And until next time, we'll see you out
on the edge.
For me, I could hardly believe this is really happening in the US. This issue is huge. This is going on for decades. We all see the damage the communism, the Chinese Communist Party is bringing to the world. I think we are really at the very, very important juncture of the moment of the history. They infiltrate every circle, every sector of America, and I think they almost succeeded without us realizing it.
Why do you think China wants to control the US?
If they can't take over America, they take over the world. That's as simple as that.